going through what you've gone through just a few weeks ago, which, I mean, I admire the way that you've devoted your life to this activism, but you're at a point in your life where, I guess rest is far away, but, but how you've seen a lot. Like, is it getting worse, or is it our imagination that it's getting worse? Because it feels collectively like this country's getting worse, more fascist, more authoritative, or is that just that?
No, the country is getting worse in terms of government, the social system. There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
But is it getting worse for the people? I say no. And I think the critical question here goes back to the question of organization. It also goes back to the question of some kind of political clarity. Like genuinely for revolutions to occur, there's certain necessary ingredients that include crisis, like what we're experiencing now. The system is in crisis, and it should be in crisis. A system based on colonialism and terror and stealing the resources of the people of the world, starving people. You live in the United States and you see people standing on in front of stores with cardboard signs asking to be fed and living under bridges and tents, whole communities of tents. That's extraordinary. So crisis abounds in this country. It becomes impossible for the ruling class to rule in the same old way. That's a prerequisite, and that's what you see all over. I mean, we mentioned Joe Biden, but Biden, you look at things like George Floyd, you look at Mike Brown, you're looking at Biden's crimes against the people in terms of that, piece of legislation that he with the police department developed and Clinton carried out to put 100,000 policemen in the streets of this country, and everybody knew that he was talking about putting them in the Black communities, et cetera. So you have crisis. You have a situation where the United States government has created this program they call 1033, where so-called surplus weapons from the Pentagon are given to police departments throughout this country. How do you have a surplus every year? That's not a surplus. What you've got is that the Pentagon has a budget that includes funding these organizations. This is to stabilize and make sure that Black people, when we rise up, that they have this capacity to contain us. That's why we say the police function as a domestic military force, a colonial force to keep African people oppressed. So the crisis, they can't rule in the same old way. And another thing that's absolutely necessary is that the people have to have concluded that anything is better than this, that we're not going to live like this. We see that happening on some different kinds of levels, some of them even from what we characterize the right wing. I mean, it wasn't Black people who tried to overthrow the government. It wasn't Black people chasing Biden through the halls of the Capitol, talking about hanging him and stuff like that, Penton, I meant, not Pence. It wasn't Black people who did that. And who tried to keep Biden from, going into office. Nor was it you. And no matter what they might say, you have these mobs of terrorists, and nothing is. But there's a crisis in the whole system. It can't rule in the same way. More and more people are concluding that anything is better than hell. And there's, I saw a poll a couple of weeks ago said that 54% of so-called U.S. voters think that the system has to be overturned. 54%.
Yeah,
that's a huge crisis that they are confronted with. And then there must be organization. There must be revolutionary organization guided by advanced revolutionary theory. And I think you put all of this stuff together, and you create the new world that we're talking about. And this distinguishes us from some of the people who sort of thinks that the system would sort of peter out, and that you can have a Bernie Sanders solution where you get $15 an hour over a number of years and something like that. The social system, the whole capitalist social system cannot coexist with the socialist social system. I don't care what you say. I mean, you never heard of a mode of production coexisting with another previous mode of production. So that means that human beings have a responsibility. We have a responsibility, not just to sit around and hope this thing will wither away on its own. It didn't get here on its own. It's not maintained on its own. Human beings are doing this, and they place this stuff here to suppress, to repress, to oppress, starve, exploit, and we have to do something about that. That's where the question of organization is fundamentally important, and also political and ideological clarity about what it is that we're trying to go. And so what we do in our communities, the work that we do, partially is our work, it revolves around the total and absolute liberation of the entire continent of Africa, that where these false borders have been created by white people, by colonizers in 1884 and 86, that carved up Africa to give it out to each other like some mafia meeting that they had, and where our resources continue to be exploited on a daily basis, where you have a situation where the majority of people trying to survive off $2 a day live in Africa. That's extraordinary when you consider the fact that modern economies could not suffice, couldn't exist. I mean, Steve Jobs is who he is because of the coltan that came from Africa that caused millions and millions and millions of lives, even today. So, it's a tremendous resource, but it's not even accessible to African people. And that's the thing, that's the status quo that has to be challenged. It has to be changed. It has to be transformed. And that's the work that we are committed to doing. Africa must be free, and African people must be free. And so even in the process of doing that, we're escaping from the definitions that have been imposed on us by those who have enslaved us. And for the longest period of time, it's the oppressor, it's the colonizer, who's been the subjects of history, and the rest of us have been objects of history. And so the colonizer is not accustomed to hearing himself defined by those who are colonized, those who are the objects. Now the objects are increasingly moving into history and are beginning to find reality for ourselves and beginning to define the colonizer too. And that's an unpleasant sound for the colonizer. And so because they don't like what's being said, they will wake you up pre-dawn in the morning with flashbang grenades. They will knock your doors down. They will assassinate you and do all kinds of horrible things, which keeps a lot of people from saying it, as you know.
Very well said.